Before we get to super, I want to ask you as a Victorian, what is going on in Melbourne?
Oh, it's frustrating, isn't it? I hate the fact that my city and my state are the petri dish of the nation. What we've seen overnight is another 64 cases yesterday, or 61 cases I think it was yesterday, in addition to an incredible spike over the weekend. And of course that's now seen the lockdown of 36 suburbs, 10 postcodes in Melbourne. And that's such an enormous frustration, not just to the residents out there, but also to the businesses that had just started opening up again. And of course, every day that we have lockdowns in Victoria is another day that we have weight in the economic saddlebags. I'm very frustrated of the mismanagement and the incompetence that we've seen, particularly around the hotel quarantine scheme here in Australia. And I think that Premier Andrews has a lot to answer for.
Well, do you think he's made a dog's breakfast of it because, you know, he refused Defence Force personnel and opted for, you know, hotel to have private security to do it their own way, and now look what's happened. The breach has come from hotel security staff. I mean, do you think that he would have to regret? Do you think you have to regret that decision?
I think that he's going to regret an awful lot of decisions around this hotel quarantining situation. I know that a number of commentators have referred to this as our Ruby Princess moment. You can imagine how frustrating that must be. I think that having an inquiry is certainly a good idea. I hope that we get to the bottom of it. But in the meantime, of course, our priority must be suppressing the health problems, the pandemic outbreak, and getting the economy started again must be a priority. Must be a priority. Obviously, you know, seeing you were mentioning before the easing of restrictions around the country, how frustrating it is to be a Victorian today and not be able to celebrate the same easing of restrictions, particularly in those 36 suburbs.
Well, you might have heard New South Wales has said that it doesn't want to take the international flights that Melbourne, you know, was going to take. And the fact that the Premier has said we don't want those flights because we can't handle them, does that in itself suggest that he might be panicking?
Well, I'm very pleased that he has now finally accepted the assistance or asked for the assistance of the federal government. Obviously, those offers have been on the table for some time and have been inexplicably ignored. Now, the Premier, Daniel Andrews, is turning to the federal government for assistance and of course, we'll see what we can do.
OK, let's talk super. So it's July 1 today, which means, you know, people, if they want, can access another $10,000, as we were just talking about. How many people do you expect to take that up?
Well, already, Pete, around 2.3 million Australians have accessed around $19.5 billion of their superannuation in the early release scheme. To put that into context, $9.5 billion is around 2/3 of 1% of the entire superannuation system. Those numbers are about in line with government expectations. People have been pulling out on average around $7,500 from their super, and you're right, as of today, they can, if they feel they need to, take a second tranche of up to $10,000 from their superannuation should they need it. Of course, there is a trade-off. We know that there's a trade-off. If you take money out of superannuation now, you miss out on the benefits of compounding that builds that nest egg over time. But for some people, this really is an economic lifeline that they need. And the stories that we've heard, of course, are people using this money to pay their bills, to pay off a credit card, to pay off a car loan, because these are very uncertain financial times. And there is a number of stories of financial distress out there.
But people are also reportedly taking that money out and using it to gamble. So does that show that there is a chink in the armour when it comes to this policy?
I have heard those reports. When you dig into those reports, you realise that the data is being pulled specifically from a budgeting app. Of course, people that tend to use budgeting apps have problems managing money in the first place. So I think that data might be a little bit misleading. Certainly of the 2.3 million Australians that have taken money out of super, I think the vast majority of them have been very sensible about it and have used the money wisely in these very uncertain financial times.
Would you be advising people, if they can avoid it, to not take out their super? Because you referred to this a little bit earlier, that, you know, that 10 grand can, throughout the course of a lifetime, grow into a considerable amount of money. So people would be missing out on that if they take it early.
We would want people to make this, make this a very considered decision, potentially to get advice on it. They could speak to a trusted financial advisor, they can speak to their super fund, or indeed they can go to the MoneySmart website, that's moneysmart.gov.au, and that will give them a number of calculators, things that they can refer to, tools that they can refer to, just to understand, to assess what it means for them and their retirement.
So has the take-up exceeded expectations?
We expected around 2.3 million Australians to take up this offer. We expected them to take out a little bit more, but there is still 6 months to go. We would expect that a number of people will go back a second time, so the number of Australians that have taken up the offer is probably about on track, but they have taken up a little less than we anticipated. That's probably a good thing. When the program was originally announced, it was before the JobKeeper program was announced, so it's about in line with government expectations.
Okay, so and just to wrap up, so you're expecting about 2.3 million Australians to take it up a second time around, and that's similar to the first year?
Well, we wouldn't expect all of the 2.3 that have taken up in the first round to go back a second time. We would hope that the amount that they've taken out the first time is enough to tide them over. But for those that it isn't quite enough, we want them to know that this is an option that's there for them.